You can borrow one if you want this. The other document I gave you was just for interest's sake. We were talking last week, Thursday, about controversial issues in learning disabilities and learning difficulties. And I had mentioned some of those controversial practices. One of them is the whole issue of learning styles, that we have some sort of innate style which should be taken into account when people are teaching us. That is, some of us are thought to be, or at least it has been argued, some of us are visual learners, some of us are auditory learners, some of us are kinesthetic learners, some are nasal learners, and, well, I went too far. The whole issue of learning styles has become very attractive in education despite its absence of research to support it in several respects. One is it's not possible to validly and reliably measure learning styles. There is no test that has got decent methodological underpinnings. Apart from being unable to measure it, there is no evidence to suggest that teaching to one or other modalities for those people who've been diagnosed as having a learning preference makes any difference at all. But apart from that, it's a fertile field. There's a lot of money to be made in pushing learning styles. However, the article that I've given you just is perhaps one of the first where we've seen major publicity given to its real status in education. And it's only because this person who made the pronouncement is a baroness and a famous scientist. So I've included that just for interest's sake, and also a little article that I wrote some years ago about learning styles and Freud, which is intended to be a satirical piece. We've talked so far about the issue of reading, literacy development, how it occurs. We've talked about ways of assessing literacy, in particular in relation to our work in the clinic. And in this series of weeks, I want to talk to you about interventions that we use in the clinic. It's a particular salience to you at the moment, I imagine, because some of you will be doing cases in the clinic in which a reading intervention will be the outcome of the assessment. So we're going to look at corrective reading, and hence that document. What I expect is that you will read the first 17 pages. I don't plan to talk about those. They are, I suppose, summarising the sorts of things we've already talked about in the first semester. So what I'd like to do in this sequence is get into the nitty-gritty of what's involved in the program, or the levels of the program. We'll look at each level and look at how we might train parents to use these programs. So I'll give you a bit of background about the corrective reading program and also about teaching parents to use them. One bit of information that I haven't got in that document, which may be of interest to you, is up there on the overhead, and it gives you the approximate grade levels corresponding to the different levels of corrective reading. Now, this is not a formal set of a formal bit of information. This is as a result of various discussion lists among teachers who've been using these programs. If you look in the series guide for corrective reading, you'll see that they argue the levels the grade levels are rather higher than is suggested there. For example, level C2, we're suggesting that the actual grade level corresponding to someone who does level C2 would be about a grade 5 level, whereas in, I think, the series guide it might suggest somewhere around year 7. So what it does highlight, sorry, I should conclude with that last, the smaller print there is actually from the series guide, and it indicates the reading rates relevant to each of the program levels. So with level A, a starting rate of 45 words a minute with an end rate of 60 words per minute. These are the objectives. For B1, 60 going up to 90, B2, 90 to 120, C1, 100 to 120, and C2, 120 to 130. You can see that the climbing, the elevation of the rate diminishes as you get towards the higher end of the program sequence, and that's because the material is getting significantly more difficult. So fluency is related to both the complexity of the material as well as one's growth in fluency.
Is that correct words per minute or just words per minute? Correct.
Let me rephrase that. Words per minute.
Right, so if someone reads 91 out of 97 words correctly, but they read 97 words that they
in the corrective reading instructions, I'm pretty sure it doesn't suggest that you look for correct. Mm-hmm. It does. You can get an idea in that, for example, I've just opened here on a page, lesson 38, level B2. The checkout is the student can earn 2 points by reading at least 105 words and making no more than 3 errors. So it's 105, maybe minus 3. What that does highlight, though, is if we see a student in the clinic and he's in year 4 and he's at level A, it does give you some idea of just how much of a struggle the student is finding things. So level A is not quite a beginning reading program. We haven't started with the beginning reading program, but I do hope to talk to you about that further into this semester. We've started with corrective reading, and as the name implies, it's a correction of something that's already there. So corrective reading is designed to be a remedial program, and it's for students in year 3, mid-year 3 and above, up to adult. We've already done, I think, a practice of the placement test for this program. Did we do that in the first semester? No? Okay, we'll do that. You might have watched a video of it.
Yeah, you showed the video.
Yeah. We'll give you an example of doing that. So let me give you an overview of corrective reading. So we're talking about students year 3, mid-year 3 and above, though at a pinch occasionally we've used it with younger children. The program has 2 strands to it, a decoding strand and a comprehension strand. The decoding strand is the one we use most frequently, and that's because most of the reading issues we see have a strong decoding element to them. That is, the students we see can't get the words off the page, and that's where a lot of our attention is drawn. However, there is a comprehension program which I've provided some information further into your booklet. Comprehension Program. Remember when we talked about a child who's struggling with reading, and one child had good listening comprehension and poor reading comprehension, and we decided his problem was not that it didn't have a generalised problem, had a specific problem, couldn't get the words off the page. Because when he was relieved of that task, and you read the stories to him, he was fine. He could understand what the communication was about, he could think about the meaning of the passage, he could answer questions. But with a similar level of complexity, when he had to get the words off the page, it didn't work. So here is a child ready for corrective reading, decoding only. As long as he can get the words off the page, he'll comprehend. We talked about another child in the same year who had problems with both listening comprehension and reading comprehension. And we presumed that the likely problems there are twofold, both. So corrective reading decoding would be relevant and corrective reading comprehension. So each of those strands might be relevant to that second class of child. We're going to talk initially mainly about the decoding program, the different levels of the program corresponding to where the child is placed on the placement test. The placement test is a test of reading rate and accuracy, and so you might have a child, say in year 4, and you do the placement test and he comes out at level A, so that's the program that he's ready for. We have in mind that a child who's struggling, we would like to see complete level C by the end of primary school, to give them a decent opportunity to cope with secondary curriculum demands, the reading demands of a secondary curriculum. So somebody who's at year 4 and places at level A on the placement test, you are looking at maybe 300 lessons, given that A is 65 lessons, B is 125 and C is about the same.
So is it usual that you go right through to the end of C2 always? You don't stop if they've grasped B2 fairly quickly, you stop?
It sometimes, but rarely happens, that somebody will get over the hump, if you like, and start to go by themselves. Mm-hmm. We saw one this year, but it's relatively rare. Typically what happens is you do level A, assuming the parents have got the wherewithal, the endurance and the capacity to ensure they actually do the whole program. At the end of level A, there is a mastery test that says, yes, this child has met all the expectations of level A, he's mastered everything that we've taught. Or alternatively, the mastery test might say, go back to lessons 52, 4, 7 and 8 and practice these sections before doing the mastery test again. At the end of the mastery test, you can either go to level B1 or you can, just for interest's sake, do the placement test again. And if you do the placement test again, 9 times out of 10, the child will come out as needing B1. But just occasionally, you'll get a child who leaps a level. So,
would we standard practice to do that, to test again?
No, probably hasn't been. But, I mean, that's a decision you can make. Do you bring the parents in and the child out of school for a reassessment at the end of the program level, or do you simply say next level? It's not a bad idea. Of course, the placement test, pardon me, is it's not a very complex test. It doesn't take very long. It always amazes me that somebody will do a level, you do the placement test again, and they come out at the next level. You would think that just with issues of reliability that, you know, it may have problems doing that, but it is amazing how regularly that does happen. I think with the case we saw this year where the child jumped, there were other indicators as well, and we, if I remember correctly, we did a formal reading assessment as well, just to guarantee that it wasn't simply a glitch that the child had appeared to have jumped a level. The other issue is whether the parents can keep going. It's pretty hard to have 300 lessons ahead of you, particularly with a child who's disheartened or worse, actively resisting. So there are various ways to get to level C2, and it may not be a straight sequence of teaching decoding. Some parents might say we need a break. We've done 150 lessons or something. We need a break. So I'm not that keen on breaks per se, but sometimes we'll say, well, spelling was an issue. What about doing a level of spelling mastery? Or if comprehension is an issue, what about doing a level of comprehension?
If you have a group of 4 readers in a school, could they do this program together as a class after school, half an hour every day? Instead of
Take more than half an hour, it's about 50 minutes. But it is, corrective reading is in fact a classroom or small group-based program. So it's designed for groups of 10 to 15 or up to 15 at most.
And each lesson takes 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Kerry, if the child's a lot older and they place quite a way back, what would you have them to? How far could you get them through that?
Well, it's a stage thing, not an age thing. So you would, if a child, I mean, we've had adults in the clinic who've come out at level 8 and who've had a partner with sufficient love to stick with them despite their illiteracy and work with them over a period of years to get them up. The outcomes are not quite as satisfying as they are for younger children. You tend to get significant improvements in accuracy, but fluency seems harder the older you are, the harder it is to become fluent. So that sequence depends on the level of disadvantage that this child has educationally. Thinking of a couple of cases I've seen recently where a child is maybe in year 6 and his literacy and associated skills is about year 2 or even year 1. And so the recommendation has been decoding A, comprehension A, spelling mastery C. And then if we were really keen, we'd probably look at maths as well, corrective mathematics. So here's a child where you're thinking his needs are just too severe for one parent who can usually only do one program at a time. That's a rule of thumb. It's pretty hard in a given family to even find the 45, 50 minutes for one program when all these other competing things are happening in the family. Kids are going to sport, going to music, stresses in the family, all sorts of things can impede the fidelity and the duration of the program. So we wouldn't normally ask a parent to do two different programs, say spelling and decoding, or decoding and comprehension at the same time, because it's just overwhelmingly difficult to manage.
Does normal school homework, do they have to do these programs and normal school homework as well?
That's something that has to be negotiated. Sometimes schools are really helpful and they'll say, we're delighted somebody's doing something about Johnny, we've never really managed to have an impact, and so we'll relieve him of his homework during the duration of the program. Others will say, no, you've got to do your homework, whatever else you do is your business. So that's a real problem. And of course it gets worse the further you are into school. We've got a couple of cases at the moment in kids in secondary school and even getting up towards VCE and homework demands. How do you drop those and work on basic skills? There's no simple answers to those questions. The point I was getting at before was when you have a child who is so far behind that they've lost touch really with the curriculum, much of what's happening in their grade doesn't resonate with them at all. It's just beyond them, or it's travelled beyond the distance they've travelled. Then our recommendations have been things like this child needs 2 hours at least per morning of instruction in the literacy areas of decoding, comprehension and spelling. Usually the report gets filed in the round filing cabinet rather than anything happening, but at least we're making it clear in our report just how serious the needs are for this child. And even in those examples, there are cases where the parent has said, well, the school won't do anything, I'll at least do decoding, but you know in your heart that this is only a good intervention, but it's only one area of need for this child, and the chances of him really catching up are negligible at the rate. Remember when we talked, actually I've got that graph that I've talked to you about before. The graph of rate. I thought it was towards the end. Yes, it's on page 127. Simple graph, but it does give you an indication of the difficulty there is in trying to catch up with a peer group when you've got an average rate of progress being that 45-degree line, and you've got a child who for some years has been learning at a flatter rate than that. In order for them to catch up over the period of a few years, you see that their learning rate needs to be even faster than the average child's learning rate. And to achieve a rate like that, it doesn't happen by magic. The only variables you've got are quality of program. What were the other two? Anyone remember? Duration and intensity. So they're the only things you've got to play with. Maybe gene splicing one day, but for the moment, that's the only way you can get an elevated rate of learning. So to get an elevated rate of learning, you're going to need to intervene with the best programs intensively, hence the recommendation for 2 hours not necessarily in a block, but 2 hours a day, and over a significant period of time. You could be looking at several years.
So is that the recommended 2 hours per day?
Well, if you were looking at 3 programs, say spelling, decoding and comprehension, it would take you at least 2 hours.
Would you ever do maths at the same time as reading?
Sure, you can, if you get 3 hours or 2.5 hours. You could argue a case for maths. My view tends to be maths is sacrificed. If literacy is a significant need, then it's a dominant need, and maths goes down the drain. If however you've got fewer domains to be addressed, then maths is clearly an important one. It pains me to dismiss maths that way, but in terms of a child's progress throughout school, maths is less of an impediment to their progress than literacy on the child. Let's have a look then at decoding A on page 18. you can see from those, does anyone need another copy? Have you got this?
We can go on today.
Yeah.
Thanks,
So we're on page 18. You can see from the skills that are taught in this level, you're going back to the sounds of letters. It's not a beginning reading program in that it doesn't teach every letter in the alphabet. It doesn't spend a lot of time on teaching blending, and those are the two big areas in a beginning reading program of the phonics type. But it does review those procedures, sounding out words and then saying them fast, which is another way of saying them on sight. Looking at some irregularly spelled words as well, doing some reading of sentences and doing some spelling practice. So what does it look like? Well, that's the teacher's book, and in the teacher's book you have all the lessons that are to be presented. I mentioned that this is in fact a school-based program, and it does mean when you teach this to a parent, you need to let them know that there are some aspects of this which are not part of their teaching when it's being used one-to-one. I'll come to those in a minute. So, the parent works from this book. The student for level A has a workbook as well, and the workbook is a set of activities that are done at the end of the lesson. The child writes in the workbook, and they're just extra practice at the sorts of things that have been taught in that lesson. This we lend to parents for free, but they sign a client agreement form saying they'll have it back within a certain period of time. And that's very important because we've always had problems with parents who have the best of intentions, but the thing just collapses, and unless the student is right onto it, parents can have programs for months and months and nobody's using them. We've got clients waiting for programs and nothing's happening. So we've instituted the client agreement form to try to prevent that problem.
When it may take 300 lessons, that's almost a year. Would the parent have the book for that whole time?
Well, each of these is only one level.
Oh, right.
So the red book is Decoding A, and this is Teacher Presentation Book A1. In other words, this only goes up to lesson 30. So the parent has this, and when they've got to lesson 30, they get the second red book for the rest of level A. So that's 65 lessons. What I usually say is 65 lessons. It's got to be 5 a week. We stress that. That's 13 weeks, and then we might give them a few weeks grace, so maybe 16, 17 weeks, 4 months or thereabouts. We put on the client sheet that they must have the books back by then.
And how many copies of each?
Do we have? I don't know. Not enough. We've never got enough. We keep buying them. We've been buying them for 15 years, and
It's almost no B1 size.
yeah.
Are
Well,
they expensive?
Yeah, a couple of $100 for a book.
So imagine if the parent finishes level A and they're ready for B, they're all out for another 3 months. It's detrimental of our
Yes, it is. But it's a fact of life.
They can buy the rest though, can't they?
If they, most of the parents we see are not flush,
Yeah.
however,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
yes, they could write. It's not something that I've seen happen more than once, I think, in all my time.
I guess you could really anticipate that they're going to read it and maybe call it something
Mm. Yeah, good point. You can try to predict ahead.
Is there a wait list?
So it's B1 teachers' books that we haven't got.
Oh, walking through Sharon,
Mm.
I think it is.
Okay. So for level A, there is the teacher's book, there is the student book to write in. That's the only thing they pay for. It's about $18, $19, I think, because they write in it, they pay for that. There is also a teacher's guide, which is just a set of instructions about the program. So parents, it has a lot of answers to the questions. In the original version of this, the teacher's guide used to be in the front. Now they realise they can make more money by selling it separately. So those are the things the teachers will get. Make a note too that we also have, I don't know why we bought them, we also have a book called Blackline Masters. And we don't need those. Blackline Masters are when teachers want to run off copies of worksheets and things like that. So there's no point giving those to parents.
Why not?
Because they're just designed for making multiple copies of the worksheets themselves.
Which would normally cost around $18.
Yeah. Yeah. There have occasionally been times when schools have used the multiple copy version rather than the individual version, if they can't afford the full kit. But we wouldn't recommend breaking copyright in any way. What else do we need to know? All right, let's have a look at a lesson then. So the typical session will be, we've done our assessment, we've done our feedback to the parent, we've explained why the child has a problem and where that problem resides, and we're going to teach the parent how to use this program. So I think I've got an example of lesson 1 there somewhere. Notice also on 34, 35, there is some information there about the decoding sequence and the comprehension sequence and the costs. Those costs have probably gone up a bit by now. But 36 is the first of the lessons. So you're sitting down with a parent, they know that this is going to be a phonics program, but they don't know how they're going to do it, and they've never taught reading before. All they've ever done in the past is hear their child read, and you're going to anticipate they're going to be able to teach their child to read. So there may be some trepidation involved in the way they address this task. So it's important to be quite positive and optimistic about their capacity to do this. The first thing that we normally say is, well, have a look at this page. Everything, you can't see it in front of you because you've got a black and white copy, but the parent is looking at this and we're saying everything that you say is in blue. This is a script. You are like an actor in this play. As long as you follow the script, you will be the teacher, because the authority to teach reading occurs within the program, not from the person who's doing the program. That's why you don't need to be a teacher to teach this, at least in the one-to-one. So everything you say is in blue. everything you do is in normal print. For example, if you look at task A, listen to the first sound in, and you see there in black normal print is the word pause. So that's in that print, those are things you do. And the first sound is say it, and then the next word here is signal. Bear in mind that this is a program for a class, and a teacher would be standing in front of his group of students saying, the first sound is say it, and then we'll give a signal, and all the students respond together. So the signal is, as a conductor might, to get a choral response. So we can ignore this right throughout the program. For parents, you can ignore the word signal. The only time that you might consider the parent learning to signal is if you've got a child who is a recalcitrant early interrupter who just always wants to get in first before the question has been asked. That's probably the only sort of circumstance. Maybe a child with ADHD, something like that. So basically ignore the signal and let the child respond as they are ready. Move back to the top. We're going to do things together if you all do a good job. So the parent's got to, you're all Sonny. Whenever I say all, or else if the parent can translate in real time, if you do a good job, you will get 4 points. So this system has a token economy built into it. Some parents use the token economy at 4 points at 4 different periods during the lesson. They can obtain points. So there's 3, and at the end of the lesson there are bonus points if the parent wants to use them. In the student's workbook, there are boxes at the top for these points to go in. So if parents have any concerns about their child's preparedness to do the program, we spend some time talking to them about what would be suitable reinforcements, and then how many points should be assigned. A child can earn 20 points a day, so that's 100 a week. Let's get our reinforcements to be reasonable, such that 100 points doesn't equal an Xbox or something like that. You've got to get the relative proportions and value correct. So if they decide to do the point system, it's worth spending a bit of time getting it right. And I tend to suggest a series of reinforcers, like a menu of reinforcers worth different points, so children can save their points. They can spend a few when they feel like it. 5 points on a Tim Tam, whatever they wish. Frequent flyer program. One parent we were talking to the other day had decided that the Xbox would be allocated according to points earned. Time on the Xbox was going to be calculated based on points earned. Others have said, my kid's been after me for a new set of gym shoes or something like that. They've worked towards those. So using the points, I think, is worthwhile. It even adds a bit of interest, even if the child is pretty amenable to the program. It just adds a little bit of interest to do the points. And it gives the child feedback on how they go. You must respond on signal. Well, that's not going to be relevant. That second paragraph in the blue near the top is not going to matter. Some of the issues here then are, if you look at task A, you'll notice that the is down there 3 times, indicating that you're holding the sound for 1.5, 2 seconds, something like that. Also, it has a little curly thing on the top. Does anyone know what that is? Is it called a macon or mason? Whatever. The curly thing on the top means the short sound, the sound most commonly used. So it's ah, the ah sound. Had there been a bar on the top, a flat bar, then it would have said its long sound, the ae sound. One of the issues in this is that parents at least need to be fairly sure of their own sounds, and the ones that can be problematic, leaving aside people with English as a second language. The ones that can be problematic are the E sound and the I sound. Being able to produce the E sound and the I sound and having them sound different, but also being able to hear when their child is making those sounds and being able to hear the difference between the short I and the long E sound. The next feature concerns the sorts of sounds that are presented. The A, obviously, a vowel sound, and in step 3 there, listen to the last sound in at. The last sound is t. That's called a stop sound. T is a stop sound, and it's very hard to say in isolation. The tendency is to say it out loud, to voice it, and to come out with a t. Yeah, a schwa on the end of it, a t. So when you are teaching those stop sounds, like the P, the B, the T, D. Have I got them all?
K, stop sound.
K, thank you. C.
G.
I'm not sure about G, where that fits. Yes, it is. The best way to think about the true sound is to think about it at the end of the word. So if you think about the sound at the end of the word hot, it's not, that's another word, but it's just hot. So you try to say it in a soft, unvoiced way. If you put your finger to your throat and you say t, you can feel the resonance occurring in your throat. But if you do it in an unvoiced way, you don't feel that vibration in your throat. And that's what you're trying to get, and that's what you're trying to have your parent produce as well. I wouldn't spend too much time on it, but the rationale is if children are to listen for the sounds in words, then it's better if the sounds you're producing are the genuine sounds, not a vague approximation. And t is only an approximation for t. So the easiest way, I think, is to say it softly and try and be crisp with it. Notice that there is a very important request in Task A, Step 2, repeat Step 1 until firm. You'll find that ad nauseam throughout the program. Repeat until firm. This is a mastery program, and everything that is taught becomes a foundation for everything that follows. So if a child doesn't master a given element, there is the risk that subsequently the foundation will not be there for future elements that require that as a basis. So that means we need to give parents the permission. We exhort them, please don't just roll through the program thinking my child will pick it up tomorrow. but rather it's better to stop and practice anything that is slightly problematic until you're confident that the child's got this right. So, suppose you said, listen to the first sound in at, the first sound is say it, and the child says at. You have to say something like, the sound is say it, so you model it again and ask the child again. So correction procedures are an important part of the program, and in fact you'll find if you look across to the second column where those two vertical bars, it actually specifies a correction procedure for a particular error that might be made. For example, we're simply pointing to letters just to give children some practice at some of these letters, which we expect they would have known. And that reminds me, when a child starts a program, whichever level they start at, they start there because they passed the placement test at that level. You tend to find that they initially find the program very easy, and that's intentional, but don't be fooled into thinking, oh, it's the wrong program. What happens is you start at a point where a child is competent, has the information, can do the task, and then you move from there. So don't be surprised if a child finds these tasks very easy. So you're pointing to the S, and you're saying S and E. Notice the bar on the top of the E's, and your turn. Say each sound when I touch it. So I touch it. What sound? What sound? What sound? And the child says Z for this one. You follow the correction procedure. There's a mistake being made. There's a correction procedure. This sound is what sound? And that's a very common correction procedure. You give the answer, so you model the correct answer, and then you ask for the answer from the child. And you go back to the start of the series. That's a common part of the correction too. And it means, if you think about it, that the child will quickly learn, try not to make a mistake on the last one, because not only do I get corrected, but I have to go back to the start and do them all again as well. So why have a correction procedure? They won't learn from their mistakes, but
if they don't get it right, and like if it's a whole foundation of what needs to be built on top, if they don't get that right, then
yes, that's true. But why write your own? Surely a parent would know. Reliable standard, yeah. It's just like manualised treatment in CBT. If you specify a correction procedure, you try it out on 5,000 kids and you rewrite it because of new wording saves 3 microseconds, and you rewrite it and you try it on another few thousand kids, you discover that some of these components are all about efficiency, and that efficiency is related to intensity and duration of intervention. If you can save time, or the corollary, if you can cover more in less time, you are giving these kids a fighting chance. So the more you can specify aspects of the teaching program that have been shown in field trials to work better than leaving it up to people's discretion, the better off the kids are. This is the second part of the DI programs that isn't talked about as much as its content, and that's the design of the lessons, the care that's taken in how you present things, the language you use, the words you choose, the corrections you use, the sequence of tasks. All of those things are not random. They have a theoretical basis. And if any of you are interested in the theoretical design of instruction, I'd urge you to read some of Engelmann's academic work, including the theory of instruction. If you're interested in that side of it, how does he come up with these sequences of tasks to be so efficient, then I'm happy to give you some material about that.
I was going to say, 50 minutes a session or a lesson, is that take into consideration where they may need to go back and keep correcting? If it's say taking an hour and a half, an hour and a half to get through it, is that maybe the instructions aren't given correctly or possibly they're at the wrong level? What would you suggest on that?
If you look at the feedback sheet, which is on about page 75, we've designed in the clinic these feedback sheets. We want to ensure the student is successful from the start and maintains success. We know, as I said, that there's a mastery test at the midpoint and at the end of the program that will tell us whether the child is successful. But are we prepared to let parents go for 30 lessons with no sense of how the child's going? We think not. So we designed these feedback sheets, and each day that the parent does a lesson, they fill in the feedback sheet and they feed it back to you as a clinician every week or fortnight, initially every week, and it will tell us whether the lesson's going along okay. One of the columns there is how long the lesson took. Now with level A, probably you don't need 50 minutes. With level B, there is some timed reading tasks and 2 reading tasks that do take 10 minutes or so. With level A, you probably don't need 50 minutes, probably 35, something like that. However, the lesson time when a parent is learning this, it might take them an hour and a half to get through a lesson, even if the child's making reasonable progress. Because as you'll find when you have a bit of a practice together, try to read a script, listen to the child's answers, remember the correction procedure you should use when there's a mistake, and at the same time keep your own mind clear enough to hear the errors. It's not easy to do, and most people find it that this is quite uncomfortable. Teachers find the same thing. It takes you about 20 lessons before you begin to get a framework in your head about how this all works. And you begin to become adept at hearing the mistakes and making the corrections in a nice, fluent way. So initially it's hard work and you'll be slow and painful as a teacher teaching it. So one of the things we look for is, sure, the initial lesson time might be much longer than we want, but we should see it declining as the parent becomes more adept at presenting the lesson. If it doesn't decline, there are several possibilities. One is that we have a child with an intellectual disability. I think I've told you about some of the examples we've had where lessons have needed to be repeated several times, or they don't even get through a lesson in a session because of the amount of repeating that needs to be done for every step. Or it could be that the parent is completely disorganised. They might be conversing about the day's activities in the middle of the lesson, breaking up the lesson to go and have a cup of tea, all sorts of things like that. Could be causing elongated lesson times. Is this an example, a real life example, Kate?
Oh no, in the case of the questions otherwise.
Yeah.
What's free reading then?
Free reading is just a shot in the dark, in the sense that we'd like the students that we're working with to practice the reading skills they're developing in the lessons. We know about generalisation and how hard that is in most areas of psychology to ensure. And it's just an attempt by asking parents to keep a record of how many minutes today do you estimate Johnny did free reading at home. And it's just an estimate. The idea being sometimes if you measure, you intervene. So if a parent every night has to put in how many minutes a day little Johnny read, there might be a slight pressure for Johnny to do some free reading and thereby practice the skills. So really to suggest that that's necessarily true, you might prefer it to be true because everyone would rather do things. You would rather learn to play golf by playing at Augusta, but in fact the more efficient way to learn to play golf is to spend a lot of time on a driving range and hitting at a net, the same shot over and over and over. So it's not always the case that authentic activities are the best way to develop skill. So in a synthetic approach, you might also find attendance to parts of words, non-meaningful, but nevertheless parts of words to be focused on, such that you begin to recognise similarities between words. You would think that this is so obvious, but from time to time in the clinic I see children who you can teach them to read the word hat, and they can't read the word hats. So you haven't taught them, you've tested them. They could get the word hat and couldn't get the word hats because they've never seen hats before. Not the objects, but they've never seen the word. They have a view that if I've not seen this word before, I don't know what it could be. And it might vary as by simply one letter. So you have to put yourself in the headspace of those kids who are using inappropriate strategies or haven't been taught generative strategies that will work for new words as well as the words that you are currently reading. One way to do that is to spend some time on phonograms or word families. The proper role of context. One of the strongest components of the whole language approach to reading that has dominated instruction around the world, at least in the alphabetic language world, has been the 3 cueing system, in which it is thought that skilled readers use every cue that they can to determine what's on the page, and in some way they integrate these different components. Contextual cues, they look for meaning in the sentence. If I can't figure out this next word, what do I think it might be based on the rest of the sentence? What do I think it might be based on where this word is? Do I think it'll be a noun or likely to be a verb? And then finally, what does it start with? Maybe I can get some clue from that. But that's the last strategy that's taught, what the word looks like. So this dominates reading instruction. And the problem is that it's not supported by research. Context is not a good strategy. Even good readers can't do it very well. Good readers can guess from context about 1 in 4 times, but for most kids it's about 1 in 10. Partly because if you get halfway through the sentence, the meaning may not at all be evident. This word might have most of the meaning in the sentence. So trying to guess it based on the author's intent is fraught with problems. And so what the scientific approach has really said is, first, do the phonemic analysis. You look at a word, wes. Do I know a word like wes? Maybe I'll have a look at the sentence. The boy was sick. Oh, the boy was sick. So a second look at it, because it doesn't sound exactly the way phonologically it's written. So we do an approximation, and then you might look to see whether it makes sense in the passage. So it's a reversal, and it's leaving out things like the first letter strategy, and the syntax strategy is rarely considered to be helpful, in fact, because most of the kids who have reading problems would not have a clue what a verb or a noun is anyway. We've been focusing on phonology, but surely reading's primarily about understanding what you are reading. And the reason for our focus is that about 90% of the cases around the world of problems in reading an alphabetic language are about the code, not about your language or understanding the sophistication of words that are involved. Though, as I've pointed out, over time, kids who have reading problems can develop comprehension problems because they're just not reading enough to keep their comprehension and vocab growing.
So that's the you teaching the master's students how to do the program.
Yeah, it's similar to what we're doing today.
But
It's just another version. You can see how much younger I was then. So, what I think we might do is, I'll do exercise 1, and then you can have a practice together with exercise 1. So who's going to be my student? You ready? Listen to the first sound in at. The first sound is say it.
Do you want me to do it badly?
No, not yet. Yes, a little bit longer. Say it. Very good. Listen to the last sound in at. The last sound is t. Sorry. T. Say it. Yes. Listen to the first sound in C. The first sound is S. Say it. Yes. S. Listen to the last sound in C. The last sound is E. Say it. E. Yes. E. I didn't need to repeat anything because there were no errors made there. Let's do those sounds again the fast way. Listen. Say it. Listen. S. Say it. Listen. T. Say it. Listen. E. Say it. Now the next bit there, individual tests. I'll call on different students to say 2 sounds. If everybody I call on can say the sounds without making a mistake, we'll go on to the next exercise. Since only one child there, it's hardly worth worrying about that. Now, with this next one, the child is typically sitting next to the parent rather than across, so that when the parent is pointing to these symbols, the child's able to see them. One little strategy you can use as a sort of a signal is called the point touch signal. So if we're going to do this one, my turn, I'll touch these letters and say the sounds. S, A, T, E. Notice the point first gives the child, this is the one we're going to be doing, and then the touch tells them when to respond. So we'll then go on your turn. Say each sound when I touch it.
E.
Now you don't have to do it that way. You can just touch under them, but this way you do control the rhythm a bit, and you're giving this think time. It's the same period every time. The child knows how to respond. If you do that, point, take away, touch. All right, over the page. Oh no, you can have a practice at that. Have a, just in twos, do exercise 1 and 2.
So do we just sort of not bother with the individual test, or just get them to...
Correct, yes.
Page 17.
Your turn. Say it down when I touch it. What sound is that? Do you remember? Good. This sound is say it. And this sound so this sound again was good. And this sound again was and what about this sound? Of course
Alright, let's move on. Yeah. Okay, write the word on the board. What we usually do is suggest they get from Kmart or the reject shop a little whiteboard, just an A4 sort of size. It's convenient because in some of the programs you do things like change just one part of the word, and so it's easier for a child to appreciate that sit and sat are similar apart from this. And that might look obvious to you, but to some children there is no similarity between sit and sat. They're entirely unique. Can't be entirely unique, they are unique. You get the feeling, don't you, that this is a bit strange, you know, making these elongated vowel sounds, for example, and thinking about stop sounds. It takes a while to really feel comfortable with the whole notion, and so parents similarly feel that same sensation. Let's look at a couple of other tasks.
When you're teaching the parents how to implement the program, typically where would you go up to before you, or it just really depends on how quickly they get it?
Usually what I will do is do the first task in a given exercise. So if you look at exercise 4, for example, the task goes up to task F. I would usually do the first task and maybe the second task, and then if I think the parent has got the hang, I might ask them to try task C. And if they can do task C, I might get them to do task D. Probably won't do E and F in our training session because it all takes a fair bit of time, and you can easily spend an hour and a half going through one lesson. If the parent is struggling, however, the end point of this teaching session will be, we'll go over it again next week. So you don't necessarily let the parent loose after your teaching session, it's your decision. So if you're at all concerned, I mean, some parents are just terrific, you can just see it clicks with them, and others just get so confused with sounds, or they're really nervous and they're making mistakes, and it becomes worth your while to say, practice it over the week, not with little Johnny, but with another child or with your spouse. Practice it and come back and we'll have another go next week. Better to get the parent up to speed than to let them loose when they're not going to be up to it. So, exercise 3, pronunciation. one thing you should detect in my presentation, even though you mightn't suggest it to parents, is that it be done at a fair clip. The idea is to keep this lesson moving, not to have it like a dirge, and it can become that way. But initially, it might have to be slower and painstaking, but the model that you provide should be reasonably pacey. The more you can get through in time, the better. So, listen, sat, say it. Kate, you my student, please.
Sat.
Next word, me, say it.
Me.
Next word, at, say it.
At.
Next word, eam, say it.
Eam.
Next word, eat, say it.
Eat.
So I'm trying to push her along, and not to make mistakes, but just to get it flowing. And she'll get used to thinking fast, particularly if you're working with kids who are distractible, kids who tend to respond very slowly. Just having an expectation of some rapidity to it can be helpful for them. Notice also in part 3 of task A, it doesn't give you the full script. You have to keep remembering the script, which is next word and say it, next word now say it. Right, task B. I'll say words that have the sound what sound? Yes, listen, ran, sat, mad. Your turn. Ran. Say it.
Ran.
Yes, ran. Next word, sat. Say it.
Sat.
Yes, sat. Next word, mad. Say it.
Mad.
Yes, mad. Parents will sometimes try to leave out parts of the script, and it's a good idea to convince them that the words, even if they might seem superfluous to the parents, the words are there for a purpose. They should stick to the script exactly. Even if the child is leaping in, they should still insist right from the start on who's managing this program. So, printing on the board or on the whiteboard. Sat. What word?
Sat.
Yes, sat. What's the middle sound in the word sat? Yes, okay. I'm going to say a word slowly without stopping, then you'll say the word with me. First I'll say eat slowly. Eat.
Eat.
No, first I'll say it.
Ah.
Very good, Kate. Everybody, that means you, say that with me. Get ready. Eat.
Eat.
The sound is eat. Say that with me. Get ready. Eat. By yourself. Get ready.
Eat.
Say it fast.
Eat.
Say it fast.
Eat.
Faster. Say it fast. My turn. Say it fast. Eat.
Eat.
Your turn. Say it fast.
Eat.
What word?
Eat.
Yes, eat. So saying it fast is what technical word is being implied by say it fast?
Say the whole word.
Yes, say the whole word. It is, it's a fast blend, isn't it? It's when you do the blend, that's squashing the sounds together, and then saying it fast is the product of that blend. So say it fast is moving on from sounding out stage to the whole word. Now if you look at tasks B to E to F, they're all the same. Doing the finger is, I guess it's not that hard to learn. It's probably worth doing it. I have seen parents who couldn't get the timing of the finger with the voice, and so they've just done it with the voice alone. But if you can model it, it's worth doing. Word reading. My turn. I'll say each sound in this word. So the child is here beside you, and you've got the word and the ball and the arrow. giving an indication of direction. This is exercise 5. My turn. I'll say each sound in this word. 2 E's together make the sound E. Your turn. Say each sound when I touch it, okay?
E.
What sound?
E.
What sound?
Mm.
Okay, I didn't do that very well. So, what sound?
E.
What sound?
Mm.
The loop gives you a bit of an indication of when to come in. Now I'm going to sound out the word, and I won't stop between the sounds. Now this is one of the most important features of the program. I won't stop between the sounds. Do it with me, sound it out, get ready. Again, sound it out, get ready. By yourself, sound it out, get ready. Say it fast. Yes, you read the funny word, Now the issue here is continuous blending. For a child to be able to recognise that the sounds they produce, for example, in for those 3 sounds to be recognised by the student as the word sat, they need for those 3 sounds to simulate or approximate the sounds in the word sat. So they're looking at these letters, and they can't read this word yet, they don't recognise it, but they know the sound values, so they can say at, and they try to think, what does that sound like? Does that sound like a word I know? And it may not. But if they say sat, it's beginning to sound more like a word they know. A continuous blend is a much better clue to the real word that they have in their vocab than is this discontinuous act. So when we're doing blending, it's very important that we correct the kids until they can do continuous blending. Exercise 5, you can see the tasks there are all the same, so I won't bother going through those. Then you move on to the workbook exercises. And this is on, I think you've got it there, have you?
40.
Yep. On the right-hand side, that's a copy of what the students have in front of them in their workbook. So there are some simple exercises there, practicing writing the letters, joining up similar letters, practicing sounding out, and in 5, looking for particular letters in a sequence.
So the idea would be for them to complete the workbook exercises once you've gone through up to lesson, where we're up to, exercise 5, and then they'd have a couple of minutes or however long they need to do the work. So,
Yes.
right.
Is that where they earn their reinforcement points? Where is it where they can earn their points?
The points, box A, B and C. Did you notice box A, B and C there at the top of their page, of their workbook? At various points in the lesson it tells you when you'll get
It says there, write 4 in box 8, copy workbook. That shows the curriculum.
Right, 4 in box A at the top of your workbook lesson. Well, that's for the word attack. So the bits that we just did, the child gets 4 points or 0 for that. depending on how, not so much performance, I mean you can design it how you like, but it's intended to be in terms of attention and effort, those sorts of things. It's not that the child has to be errorless, but rather that they are working well.
So it's not for or nothing, so
Yeah,
they either concentrated or
yeah. That's the way they've designed it. So maybe you didn't get any points in the first section, but you get a chance to earn points in the workbook lesson. So in the workbook you can get 2 points for that. And then exercise 11 is the sounded out checkout. And that's the part where on your document, your feedback sheet, you'll notice one of the columns is called errors in reading, and there's a 1 there. This is on page 75. So in this individual reading checkout, the child is hoping to sound out all the words in part 4 without stopping, and if he does make no more than 1 error, he gets his 4 points. And you write the number of errors in that column, because the target is 1, and if you find the child's making 5 errors every time they're doing this task, then something is amiss. You would need to contact the parent and see what's going on. So it's another way of assuring that the program is being effective. So that's a lesson.
So would they have written out all of the words on the board up until that point with the sounded out checkout?
The sounded out checkout will be the part 4, those words me, am, ma, and eam. On their workbook lesson 1 page.
Oh, okay.
So it says practice sounding out all the words in part 4.
Kerry, do you ever get parents saying that this is a bit too tedious, it's too long, I'm not going to be able to do this? Do you have anything shorter? Do you have anything a bit not going to take so much time? And what do you say to that?
What results?
Yes, it occasionally happens. We've had, there's another program, a Fluency Program that can be used with nowhere near the impact. So the first thing I say is, you know, do you want your child to have an opportunity to make sufficient progress to be able to cope in secondary school? That's the big issue that and if, however, they say, look, it's simply impossible, I've got 17 kids and 3 on the way, then I might say, well, look, we can help you with a Fluency Program. It will have nothing like the impact, but it would involve you having your child read a passage of their own choice that's within their ability level, and they would read it 3 times, and you would time them for a minute to see whether they can achieve a 20% improvement in their reading rate over the period of 10 minutes or so. So it's purely looking at fluency, and it's better than not doing anything.
Yeah.
But
there is no magic. There's only the things I've talked about.
Do you think parents ever don't write down mistakes when they know they're at home? So they label what they're doing fine?
Yeah, it can happen. It's relatively rare, but it can happen. We had an example this year where a child went through A and B1, and at the end of B1, I think it was B1, we did the placement test. It came out at A. How demoralising, and we discovered, looking at the data sheets, that all the data was written in the same pencil It all looked like it had been done in one session. Yeah, that's pretty hard to deal with when that happens, because in our clinic we're doing our best to produce a fail-safe model, so we're not having kids just suffering for no beneficial outcome. And when something like that happens, it's really hard to know what else you might have done, because it does require goodwill from parents. But it's very rare. I can only think of one or two examples where that's happened. And it's mostly been, the parents have been embarrassed, that they haven't been able to keep the program going, and they've got into a way of talking to the clinician and haven't known how to break the news. So that just sort of